BassEdge Radio. You're listening to The Edge, everything bass fishing, coming to you worldwide from Megaware KeelGuard Studios.
Hey, here we go. August 1, Aaron, episode number 357. What? Rolling on. I'm excited to have another show with you here in August on BassEdge Radio, talking with a phenomenal angler today, but lots to discuss.
Yeah, lots to discuss. And Angler of the Year, you know, that coveted title that most bass heads love to go after because it represents consistency. I guess that has officially been determined now, Kurt.
Fighter walked away with it. He's just had a really nice lead over the last three events and clinched it there at the St. Lawrence River. So congratulations to Seth. We'll have to see if we can work Seth into the program here over the next month or so. I know he's going to be a busy media man for sure.
No doubt. And of course, he would be a returning guest. And we always like that because that means you're winning if you're doing that. And speaking of winning, something else that'll help you certainly win when you get to the water and don't experience breakdowns. And that is Megaware KeelGuard, proud partners of us since day one. Flex Step, Skeg Guard, right? Protects the skeg, keeps that from leaving that in the bottom of the lake when you hit something, and just also from a protective measure like me pulling out of the garage. But so many things there. Battery guard, first do-it-yourself keel protector. Be sure visit them at keelguard.com. You know, speaking of the St. Lawrence, Kurt, we're actually taping just a couple days early because you have an engagement, a little event. I'll call it a little event, kind of a big event actually, but you're going to be on the St. Lawrence River.
Yeah, looking forward to the final pro circuit event there with Major League Fishing on St. Lawrence. Aaron, I got to talk about pressure. How much pressure is too much pressure? It's going to be interesting when I hit the water, and it's going to be even more interesting to see the events that are coming after me. But let me just break this down for all the listeners.
Okay.
You have first event up there this year, the Bass Pro Tour on the St. Lawrence River. And we're actually going to talk a little bit more about that later on in the show. We've got the top angler in the world on now.
Just number one in the world.
Just number one in the world. So from the Bass Pro Tour being on the St. Lawrence, right as the season opened there in late June. Then you have the Elite Series on the St. Lawrence River, middle of July. Then you have the Bass Pro Tour on the St. Lawrence River at the end of July. Then you have a Toyota Series on the St. Lawrence River earlier in August. Then you have a Bassmaster College event on the St. Lawrence River, which always draws, 100 plus boats, team tournament. Then you have Bassmaster Open event on the St. Lawrence River. This doesn't throw in the BFLs that they have up there. Dude, this
or local
place,
club tournaments or weekend, recreational anglers or just normal pleasure boaters out on the water.
Not to mention half of the river is off limits. You can't go fish the Canadian side.
Wow. I might suggest, can we call an audible here and perhaps talk a little bit more about just, because I think you bring up a fantastic topic, right, that all of us perhaps deal with, but this is kind of at a whole nother level, and work through perhaps how do we handle that much fishing pressure? How are you going to handle, right, when you hit the water? I think this is a topic that all of us have to deal with, regardless if you fish tournaments or not.
No doubt. So you've got a couple of those events, three of those events going out of Messina, which is all the way down the river. You've got the Elite Series event going out of Waddington, which is, I don't want to say mid-river. It's definitely closer to Messina. Then you have the Bassmaster Open event, which is going out of Clayton. And it's an 80-mile river. And, of course, the lake is open in some of these events, not in other events. So it just depends on the rules of the particular tournament. So it is a huge body of water. But when you cut it in half, then you really start talking about some of the pressure. And you talk about smallmouth bass. Smallmouth bass, in general, are what I would consider a more fragile species when you're live well in the fish and that kind of thing. So you're going to have some mortality there. The local economy obviously plays a big role, and they want to have their tournaments in that local economy and have that impact in their area. So it's a wild deal, and I think most of this stuff is funded by the I Love New York campaign, and the state helps fund it because many of these communities up there are very small, can't really afford the price tag that many of these tournaments request to have a host the event and have that economic impact. Long story short is pressure.
Yeah.
How do you go about? Do you have to find the off the wall stuff? Do you just stay in the more, obvious stuff because you figure there's more fish in those locations, so they'll replenish better? The deeper bite typically, that time of year is more prevalent than the shallow bite, but do you try to buck the trend, which we've seen several times in past events there, and stay shallow in that style, in those tournaments? I'm not sure, Aaron. It's a big toss up and something I'm definitely going to have to consider when I hit the water for 2 days of practice up there on the St. Lawrence River. I feel like most of the pressure is going to be mid-river and toward Waddington, Messina area, just because that's where most of the tournaments have been. Maybe by the time I get there, not as much pressure between, say, the mouth of the river there at the lake and then, down toward Alexandria Bay because it's so far from Waddington. But, man, that's a gamble to make that long run, right? So there's a lot of things in play. I'm not sure you could technique-wise get much more finesse than drop shotting and the standard ways we catch smallmouth bass, whether maybe you turn around and you go power fish. Throw a spinnerbait up shallow. Stay up shallow with finesse, hair jigs, those types of things. There's a lot of contemplation on how to best
and hopefully
attack this event that's coming up.
And hopefully you're able to unlock that code. But definitely very, very worthwhile topics. And certainly now the wheels are turning.
Yes.
But
I'm interested to find out, Aaron, how is this pressure going to affect the fishery? It's almost like the Bassmaster #1 lake in the country voted curse. We've had that a few times where you got Rayburn was voted #1 and then it kind of struggled
Amistad back in the day. Right?
Amistad back in the day. You had Toledo Bend rated #1, started, then it kind of went downhill. So is St. Lawrence going to be kind of in that realm? I'm not sure. I think St. Clair went through that process as well. Well,
and sometimes history shows that it can be, a few years before you actually figure out what that pressure does to just the ecosystem like we talked about last time, but also then as far as just immediate tournament results, we'll see. We'll see.
Yeah, completely agreed. What we are going to see is a great event. And now we are going to see a ProtectTheHarvest.com tackle tip. Y'all stay tuned. We're going to have a great show. This episode's ProtectTheHarvest.com tackle tip with BASS Elite Series angler Matt Airy.
Yeah, hey everyone. So I wanted to talk about real quick on bluegill beds. You hear guys talk about them all the time, but you don't necessarily hear guys talk about how to find them. The best way in this day and age to locate bluegill beds is to use that side imaging, especially when the water's not clear enough to actually visually see them. Now, if it is clear enough, where you want to look is turns, little corners going into pockets, protected areas that are typically flat, and where the water's clean enough, you can look in anywhere from 1 to 3 feet of water and you can see them with your eyes. A good pair of Costa sunglasses, good pair of polarized glasses, you'll be able to see those bluegill beds. Now, that being said, a lot of those bluegill like to spawn a little bit deeper too. When you're using your side imaging, same when you're visually looking, what they look like on your side imaging is, and you absolutely cannot mistake them, they look like a honeycomb. Like the cereal we ate when we were kids, they look like a little honeycomb. It's a bunch of little small depressions, knotted up real tight. And you can actually see, with our electronics now, you can actually see when those beds are actually loaded with bluegill. One thing to remember is these bluegill will spawn all throughout the summer months, okay? There's multiple bluegill spawns. Typically, they revolve around different moon phases, but sometimes that's not necessarily true. Use your electronics, see if when you find those beds, see if they actually have bluegill on them. A lot of times what will happen is a school of bluegill will move in, do their thing, they'll move out. Another school will move in and use the same beds. So look for those beds on your side imaging. Look for them in small, flat, protected turns, corners, going into pockets, into small creeks. Look for them visually, use your side imaging, and when you find them, I promise you there'll be some big fish around. But use those tips to help you find those brim beds throughout the summer months.
Matt Airy, BASS Elite Series Pro, awesome tips. Thank you so much. ProtectTheHarvest.com featured tackle tip.
First by land and now by sea.
For years, Lucas Oil has been a staple in high-performance vehicles on both the road and track. Now, from the makers of Lucas Oil comes Lucas Marine products, specifically engineered for marine applications. Protect and lubricate your marine inboard, outboard, or high-performance boat with Lucas Marine Engine Oil or Lucas Synthetic-Based Oil. Learn more about the complete line of Lucas Oil and marine products. Visit lucasoil.com.
Nitro Performance Bass Boats. Get pro-level performance with the Nitro Z18, the official boat of Major League Fishing. The Z18, with its nimble handling and versatility, sports many of the features in the larger boats in the line, like a Guardian Live Well, a heavily insulated cooler, dual 8-foot rod storage, and our smooth and fast NVT hull. Every Nitro boat is laid out to do one thing very well: catch fish. Enormous front decks, up to 45 square feet on the Z21, allow maximum mobility when battling unruly bass, and feature low-profile gunnels for ease of skipping, pitching, flipping, or landing fish. Nitro Performance Bass Boats, pure fishing machines.
Kurt, it is that time of year. Only difference is, of course, we're talking a lot about things getting back to the way they once were, and that is ICAST, right? It's the big tackle show this year down in Orlando again. You know, I've been to them in the past where they've kind of teeter-tottered back and forth between Vegas and Florida. But it does have to kind of, I guess, bring some solace to a lot of your manufacturers and your representatives of being able to get together in person.
Yep, you know, this happened last week, July 20 through 23. As you mentioned, down there in Orlando. Although it was successful to have in person, still not back to normal quite yet.
I would agree.
Yeah, a lot of manufacturers did not make the trip. You know, there's just some people that just aren't ready to dive in, and also in all the preparations that have to happen, you know, back in March and April, kind of getting ready for these shows. There was still some uncertainty, and a lot of the big manufacturers able to make the push, and I think a lot of smaller manufacturers that still went probably highlighted themselves a little bit more. Hayabusa did not go. Reigns did not go, but ICAST still interesting.
Yeah, and Kurt, the other thing is, I will tell you, I believe all of us have experienced that business as potentially being done much differently than what it was. We may never get back to the way things were because of just the efficiencies of virtual and things like that. Now, do I believe that in person is still a better result? You know, I don't know, but that's for each company to come up with. So, you know, maybe,
I'm going to say yes.
Yeah, I
without a question of the doubt, yes. I do think you're going to see a generational change just because of you know, where our 15 to 25-year-olds are today and experiencing this in their short lifetime as of this moment, right, from where they're at, and they're seeing these things. So definitely business is going to change, Aaron. I think for us, older guard, you know, that 35 to 65-year-old, before you retire, go off into the sunset, enjoy long walks on the beach, that kind of stuff. Right. They still see the value in the person, and they want that. I feel like the emotional connection, the physical connection of people they're doing business with, and just being able to see product, touch product, and work through those things.
Well, one thing that I will tell you is way more effective, and that is trying to catch a bass in person versus virtually. Yeah. So anyway, but
although we're moving to that, we have the forward-facing sonar. We're doing more virtual fishing before we actually get the bite nowadays. But it's crazy how all these things are changing.
Well, speaking of changing and kind of crazy, it seemed like the theme, and correct me if I'm wrong here, might have leaned more towards the finesse right at ICAST this year. Is that accurate? Was there a big focus placed kind of on the finesse style of fishing?
I see and did see more of that movement, no doubt. We've seen that for a couple years, but you're still having a lot of power fishing, bigger baits come out and lures. And I see more companies concentrating on anglers that want more bites. And, the Ned rig craze and the drop shot and the
do you think, Kurt, that's because of and again, I'm going out on a limb here, do you think that has something to do with the Major League Fishing format of the more bites, or do you think it's just from the standpoint of what we had talked about in our opening segment of fishing pressure?
I think that's part of it. You look at West Coast, crowded, Southern California, you see a lot of finesse technique. Where do those come from? They come from Japan. Lots of people Lots of finesse techniques going on there because fish are highly pressured. We talked about in the last segment, St. Lawrence River, wild pressure. These things are all adjusting the way we fish. If you want to make, in my opinion, the Bassmaster Classic year after year after year, finesse is becoming more of a staple than power. There's a few guys still able to do it with power. The BBT, finesse guy. You look at Josh Bertrand. You look at Justin Lucas. You look at, frickin' Bobby Lane is drop shotting at Lake Travis to finish second place to Jacob Wheeler. You've got to be more versatile now than ever, and finesse is taking, a bigger role in bass fishing. We see that through ICAST. Let me make a couple. Can you mind if I throw out a couple things that we saw there at ICAST? Z-Man coming out with finesse football heads, all for their TRD type stuff. Still focusing on growing that finesse application. You got Missile Baits, good friend of BassEdge Radio, John Cruz. Missile Baits coming out with a finesse trailer. Why? Because he came out with a finesse jig a few years ago. Everything kind of getting smaller. You've got some medium running lures, kind of depth zones that weren't focused on in the past. You've got Rapala, had the square bill with the Brat. Now they're coming out with the mid-depth BX Brat, going to dive, 5 to 6 feet instead of that 3 feet, kind of hitting some depth zones that they weren't targeting previously. Of course, they had the DT6 and that kind of stuff. But
now it's almost like we are getting this kind of down to the micro zones, and that to me is a finesse category within itself. When you're starting to refine things within 6-8 inches of running depth, that's getting taking it pretty serious.
Take that to another step. They came out with a DT8. Right, so you had the Dive 2 series, you had the DT4, DT6, I think it was DT10, DT15, DT20, you had these gaps, right? And now you go from DT6, now DT8 to DT10. So just what you're talking about, getting more specific. So then you've got, some of the accessory stuff. You've got some of the football jig, accessories with the waggle hook behind it instead of the standard, a fixed lead to the hook. Now you've got that kind of more swing head scenario. I got to throw out Hayabusa coming out with Wacky Rig Floor carbon guarded Wacky hook, which is a great addition to our lineup. Kind of more of a medium to heavy action Wacky hook, so you can target heavier cover and use heavier lines, so you're not
and
tweaking
pull on them
out
a little bit more.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So again, same style, working on covering more in between finesse tactics. Then we had Rains came out with the NR jig head, which is Ned rig jig head with a guard. So just kind of up in the ante there with a nice weed guard on their tungsten composite Ned rig head. So those are some things that I took away from ICAST, but definitively finesse oriented, and you see that push in the game of bass fishing right now, Aaron.
Yeah, and one of the people that you mentioned in that group, it doesn't matter. I firmly believe he can have one hand tied behind his back, and he's still going to be able to catch him, and we're fortunate enough to have him on today. It's not often that you could say #1 in the world.
That's right. Y'all stay tuned. Lucas Oil Angler Spotlight coming up with a BBT angler, Jacob Wheeler. Hang tight.
This is professional bass angler Cody Huff.
This is professional angler Daryl Gleason.
This is 2020 U.S. Open champion Tim Klinger.
This is Bass Pro Tour angler Ish Monroe. I am FLW title champion Rusty Selesky.
This is Jason Christie, BASS Elite Series champion on BassEdge Radio. Stay tuned.
You know the importance of protecting your investments, so why use anything else other than the original and toughest DIY keel protector for your boat, Megaware KeelGuard. Grinding sand, abrasive rocks, and concrete ramps are no match for our exclusive contoured edge and patented technology. Megaware KeelGuard keel protectors are made tough and made to stick. Their do-it-yourself installation takes less than an hour, providing the longest-lasting, most dependable keel protection for your boat, guaranteed for life. Developed specifically by boat builders offering the best keel protection in the industry. Also from Megaware KeelGuard, Skeg Guard, Flex Step Pro, and Pontoon Guard. So give your boat the performance edge. Put on the protection the pros pick. Megaware KeelGuard.
The number one ranked bass fishing angler in the world is with us today. He is having another amazing year, just as he had the past several years since coming on to the national fishing scene. Super pumped to have MLF BBT angler Jacob Wheeler on this episode. Thanks for coming back on BassEdge Radio, Jacob.
Man, I appreciate you guys having me on, man. It's always a treat to talk to y'all and talk a little bit of bass fishing.
Well, Jacob, I've got to tell you, I was served notice by the IRS that they said if you continue winning and we keep having you on here, we're going to have to claim you as a dependent for BassEdge Radio. So anyway, and of course I'm talking about congratulations on yet another win, this time on the St. Lawrence River in New York. You know, you continue to make every event, every situation, every species look easy to figure out and pattern quickly. What's in the magic sauce, Jacob? I don't know how else to ask it. We've talked about this so many times.
Yeah, I mean, there's, I can't, I don't know, man. You just, I think that in the moment of when everything is going right and you're just making those good decisions, there's a time like where you just feel like you're dialed in and you just like everything you're doing is the right decision at the right time, the strategy behind it. And I just feel like that's just most of these events as of recent have been like it just comes to you, and it's just like things are just everything clicks. I've also had plenty of tournaments where everything doesn't go right, but fortunately I've had more of the good ones than the bad ones now, and so I think it's a progression of your career. You sort of get better as the years go on, and you start to realize some of the bad mistakes you make, whether that's through practice, whether that's through wasting time in the event. And then, of course, with the MLF format, there was a learning process in that as well, and figuring out how to strategically plan for multiple days, because it's not like, you have to be able to manage fish. But you also, it's really hard to do when you have, it's taken over 100 pounds to make the championship round at the St. Lawrence River. 100 pounds of fish is a lot. So it's definitely a fun ride, and I'm definitely enjoying it. But, it's hard to put a finger on it and say, hey, this is exactly what it is. It's just been a lot of fun, though.
Yeah, I definitely want to mention, too, that we haven't had you on the show since you won over there at Lake Travis as well. The last time we talked to you, I can't remember exactly when it was, but it was probably through Red Crest and some of those other events. But these last two wins have really been impressive and different, for that matter. When you come into an event, do you feel like before you even get there that you've already set yourself apart in some way, shape, or form before you hit the water? Let's start before you get to the event, because I really want to break down and kind of dig into expressing to BassEdge listeners, myself included, how, just this process that you have a process, whether you're putting your finger on it or not. There's something that's going on there that is, I don't want to say evolution, but it's a continuous set strategy that it's working for you. Not that you do it consciously, but it's definitely got to be a subconscious process that you're going through. So I want to start with prior to getting to the water. What is
yes?
And Jacob, you can't say it's listening to Baby Shark 50,000 times.
That's
with
right.
Olivia.
That's what it's
not going to cut
that
it.
That is what it is.
Olivia, yeah, she's making you listen to that, but you're thinking like, okay, how do I catch the next shark at St. Lawrence?
It's the Baby Shark remix, guys. I gotta tell you. The Baby Shark. No, man, it's really interesting because I've looked at both those wins, and I just spend countless numbers of hours prepping before I even get to the body of water. I mean, I'm sure my wife probably is like, what the heck? She knows the deal now. She understands it. But back in the day, I spend so much time on Google Earth. I'm constantly thinking and planning. But what's so interesting about both of those two events? I had an idea in my mind. And you hear about these preconceived notions and preconceived ideas of exactly how you're going to fish.
Right.
You don't want to do that necessarily, and that being bad. And I had it exactly in my mind planned at Travis that I was going to catch these fish out offshore. They should be out a little bit. There should be, shad spawn thing going on, which it was the shad spawn. I was actually on Chickamauga practicing my skipping on boat docks the week before I even started practice, because I anticipated that to be a bite there for that event, and ended up winning doing that. So that was a good guess, but I really anticipated the offshore deal to be starting to play, and it never did. did. And I tried to force it. And I spent all this time on Google Earth looking at stuff because the water was down and marking places that I thought these fish would get out. And it never transpired, And so there's sometimes you just have to roll with what the fish are telling you. And that was sort of that pattern developed throughout. I never anticipated to win just off the shad spawn or off of boat docks. And that's sort of how it just sort of rolled into what they were doing. And that's, you have to listen to the fish and what they particularly are wanting. And now with, really good electronics and everything else, being able to see underneath docks and be able to see sort of how their moods are and what they're doing throughout the day, there's value there as well. So that's sort of one thing. But the next event at St. Lawrence River, is sort of interesting because I had my mindset like, hey, I'm going to stay in the Waddington pool. I've actually spent some time in the Waddington pool and the Messina pool before, and I've been up there when they were spawning, and I was like, well, it's a good idea to maybe start there. And so I sort of put almost all my eggs while I was researching in that pool. And I went up there that first morning of practice, spent 2 hours there and said, no, this ain't it. And literally put my boat on the trailer and drove 70 miles towards the lake and dropped my boat in the water and started practicing down there because they just weren't in the phase that I wanted to be in. And I figured, typically because the water comes from Lake Ontario is colder, the spawn is going to go towards the lake. So that's why I was like, nope, they're not in that process. I'm out. So there's times that like all this prepping and preparing does help, but there's also times that you have to make adjustments instantly just on the fly. And I think those are the biggest decisions that are made are the ones that you make during practice, during the tournament to abandon what you might have found or what, and try to go do something different.
Generally in that 2-day practice period, while kind of still talking about this prior to you hit the water deal, are you looking to stay in a certain section of the lake or certain section of the body of water you're fishing because you have limited practice time? Obviously, you didn't do that at St. Lawrence, but that was because you saw a preconceived behavioral pattern that might play to your desires of how you wanted to fish the tournament, right?
Yeah.
It sounded so simple. Like that just flew off your tongue. Like, well, they're just going to be spawning later out there at the mouth of the river because the lake's close by and it's colder water. That sounds like crazy, dumb, fundamental.
And by the way, I drove 70 miles to make that happen.
But I'm just here to tell you, bro, 45 to 50 other anglers never freaking had that thought.
Yeah.
I mean, they're just not thinking that deep. So, that's just taking it another level on the analytical front from a behavioral standpoint, which do you think that, you generally throw the dart at, what the seasonal behavior patterns going to be? Because we all have to figure out where to start somewhere, right? And we have 100%. Fundamentals of fishing, right? I mean, you got seasonal behavior patterns. I work with youth anglers a lot, like in my fishing camp. They're always asking me, man, well, I don't know where to start. How do you decide where to start? And that's part of the camp is to talk about those fundamentals, seasonal behavior patterns, water temperatures, those types of things. And you're taking it to a different place because now you're talking about the ecosystem and how the environment works, right? I mean,
it's tough. I mean, it's just something that I feel like you just learn as you go. And there's so much. I mean, I learn every single day I'm on the water. I think that's the biggest thing is if you look at the best fishermen, most decorated fishermen in the history, I look at like some of the best of all time. I think of Rick Clunn, I think Kevin Van Dam.
Right.
They're constantly still learning. That's what makes it so much fun. If you get to the point where you can place it and you're just like happy about what you know, you're going to fall behind. And so I think that that's something is never being satisfied and be like, oh, this is just how it's going to be. I mean, there is things that I look at that are different. I think that, you have to. When you asked about like, hey, you practice in one area. So in the MLF format, each are different. They both have a lot of strategy. So a traditional 5-fish format over an MLF format, every fish counts. Typically, you're better off trying to find a zone and staying in that zone and understanding it because you can't be moving around a lot. Where in a 5-fish format, I might fish 60 miles because I'm only trying to catch 5. I could run here, I could run there, I could run, so that's typically, just over the years, that's definitely a huge, from what I've learned, a huge deal in confining yourself to an area. But the problem is with that, and this is the issue, the problem with that is if you pick the wrong zone, very much so like I did the first day of practice in the first 2 hours, and I felt like I picked the wrong zone, you can get stuck and have a bad event if you just live with it. So that's a tough thing. It's a tough deal. You got to sort of pick, you spin the wheel and you're like, all right, I'm going to do this right here. And sometimes you're going to guess wrong. I mean, that's just part of it.
And, to your point earlier, Jacob, the great ones, right, always make it look easy. And you're certainly in that category in any sport, whether it's Roger Federer in tennis or you can name any great athlete. But it's almost because I think, the problem in articulating is just because that your antennas are always up, right? And you're always taking in information perhaps in and maybe not attaching an emotional component to whether it's right or wrong. It's just, this is how it is and this is what I must do, action, reaction. So when you are on the water and kind of talking about the practice, if you were to give BassEdge Nation one kind of nugget, what do you think would be the takeaway that most anglers aren't doing or that they're not real good at, kind of to Kurt's further point, that you're just simply better at?
Man, it's so hard to pinpoint an exact deal, but I think that in the tournament, decisions are everything. That is what changes. Everybody can go out there. A lot of people can go out there and they can fish and practice and they can go catch them. They can go fish the places they caught them at and make it work. The things that are hard and only a handful of people that I look at, like Odd Defoe, I look at Brian Thrift, I think there's guys like that are really good at this, is making adjustments within the event. When that clock is ticking, a lot of people freak out. They get that pressure, whether it's short tracker, whether they're trying to catch 5 of them, whatever it is. They freak out and they have to go to the exact place that they got a bite. And sometimes you have to let the day come to you. And so I will actually fish around a little bit. You get messed up by doing that too, by like wasting too much time. But I mean, like that first day of that tournament, I had an area, I had a mindset of like what they were doing. And then like it just dawned on me, like in the middle of that day, like I actually caught half the fish that I caught on day one were brand new fish in different areas. But it was just that it instantly like clicked. I'm like, that's what they're doing. And so it connected and then I just ran with it. I think that's the biggest thing is people get so caught up with their practice and that's the Bible to them. Like this is what's happening, that they completely miss the clues that they get within the tournament to make the adjustment to get them a good solid finish and have a good day on the water.
It makes a lot of sense. It makes a lot of sense. And it is hard to adjust. We could take a look at the recent Champlain Elite Series event. Brian Schmidt, great friend of mine, had 2 awesome days, right? And he was catching largemouth, rock areas in vegetation and doing really well. And he knew he was kind of running out of fish. But it's one of the hardest things to do is adjust as you're winning or doing well in a tournament to stay on top. He was able to kind of clinch it and hold on. In a lot of cases, we see Jacob Wheeler. And I think the reason you're so dominant in a lot of these events is because no matter what, you're always continuing this adjustment and evolving into more and better bites than the other 80 anglers that are fishing that same body of water. And that's what's making a bit of a difference. And part of it's probably confidence and faith, right?
Yeah, for sure. Confidence is probably the biggest thing. When you have that confidence in yourself, confidence in making those decisions, I think that it just flows. You're not sitting there, like you're completely 100% trusting every decision that you make is the right one. And it might not be at the end of the day, but you believe it is. In your heart, you think it is. And so if you have that confidence, it's like, well, no one else is going to tell me to do any different. I'm going to go out here and I'm going to catch them doing this. And that sounds good to me. And that's what my mind thinks. And like, hey, I'm going to figure it out. And if I make a bad decision, it's on me. But it is the most difficult thing to do, especially when you're successful or when you're having a good tournament. That's probably that's the hardest thing to do. Like when Schmidt or was in that moment where he's got to make an adjustment because at the end of the day, everything else is not working for him and he's trying to beat a dead horse. That is the hardest moment in bass fishing over the years that I've seen and I've been in. It are those moments because it's like, man, I'm here at this point for a reason. I'm at the top of the leaderboard for a reason, but everything that I have is done. And you have to and it's tough when you don't have a clue though. That's the thing. The toughest part of that moment is if you don't have a clue. If you do not have a clue and you're sitting there and you're just like, all these pieces are gone. And you're like, gee, I know I'm leading this tournament, but everything that I have is shot. What do I do now? That is the toughest part. Now, if you get a clue, it's like, all right, let's go ride with this. But there's plenty of days that you'll be out there and you'll be competing and you will never get that clue. it is what it is. I mean, it's part of the game.
On this MLF deal, the strategy played with you using heavier line to horse in the smallmouth that you were catching on bed. For BassEdge Nation that doesn't know, a lot of the anglers in that particular event were catching fish on light line, spinning rods, catching smallmouth on bed. Jacob did some of that too, but he caught a lot of fish. What was it, 17-pound test, 20-pound test?
I was just throwing 12. I just 12. 12. No, I was throwing 17 on my bait caster, which I did boat flip quite a few 4 and 5 pounders.
Right.
But the thing is, with what you're saying, upping your pound test was like 12. I mean, 12 is a decent amount for a swimmer. I think you typical, typical
right.
pound test is probably 8. 8 is probably the norm. 10's bumping it up, and 12's like,
big line.
Yeah. I mean, it's bigger, it's bigger. And I think it comes down to a lot of different things. But in that situation it's a little bit bigger. I mean, the thing is the scenario of what it was is all right, listen, I'm sitting here, and if there's a fish on the bed and he goes and bites my lure, like, is he really caring about that line? Like, probably not. I'm not sitting there trying to finesse a school of smallmouth that has been pressured for 100 days, and there's a lot of variables that go into line. I don't even think a lot of times line's that big a deal. Diameter's that big a deal as far as visually them seeing it. I think it's more the action of the bait than anything. But that's another talk for another day. I've used this several times. I have definitely used it several times. I've even done it a lot, even where you get those, if you're just getting those fish, even the super tournament last year, I was still throwing 8 and 10. I threw some 12 as well. Sturgeon Bay, I threw some 12. It just depends on the fish and the fishery, and then really ultimately how much pressure they're getting and receiving. It seems like the pound test, and it really comes down to the baits you're throwing, and then and the rate of fall, and all of these things that actually dictate. And now with forward-facing sonar, you can see how they react. I think that's the biggest thing now. Like, hey, if I pitch out there with a drop shot or with 12-pound test with, Guggen baits and rattling net, and they both have a rattling net on there, and I pitch out there with one with 8 and one with 12, and they bite both of them, you're like, well, why don't I just throw the one with 12?
Yeah. Just so BassEdge Nation is clear, the reason you utilize that, you're catching 30, 40, 50, some odd, 60 fish a day, whatever it was, but you were able to horse several of those fish in quickly, not take 2-3 minutes to, finesse the fish to the boat like some of the other competitors were doing. And so it gave you more time to catch more fish.
Yeah,
so it was strategy-wise based on the MLF format. And even if you were in a 5-fish situation, it's like,
absolutely,
like you said, you're going to eat 12. Duh, right? So how much time do you think that it saved you, Jacob?
I don't know if I put like the numbers to it. Like, I think it was just a strategy in my mind that like it didn't make sense to
enough to make out a deposit slip.
Yeah, it was probably 30 minutes. I'm sure the way I was fighting them, it was probably 30 minutes. But the key with those smallmouth is you just have to get their head up.
Yeah.
Their power is in their head, of getting down and being able to use their body against you. Right. If you can get their head up, they jump, and you get their head up out of the water, it's over. It's just a problem. It's just if they get their head down, you're going to be there a minute. It doesn't matter if it's a 2.5 pounder or a 5 pounder.
And you say 30 minutes, and 30 minutes when fish are on bed, that's probably finding 2, 3, maybe 4 fish and having time to catch them very quickly again. So big difference. Yep. And even if they're just 2 pounders, that's 8 pounds.
Yeah,
that's
no
awesome
doubt.
Stuff, man.
No
Awesome
doubt.
Stuff. All right, we're diving into a lot of cool stuff here. I need everybody to hang tight. We're going to just kind of go to a short pause in the action as we power pole down here. Jacob, Aaron, and I will return right after this message.
Patented in 2000, perfected over years of testing and real-world punishment, the Power Pole is the ultimate shallow water boat positioning tool. Swift. Power Pole deploys in seconds from anywhere in your boat. Virtually silent, Power Pole won't spook wary fish. Secure in strong currents or gusting winds in up to 8 feet of water. Engineered to take it with a lifetime unconditional replacement guarantee on the spike. Power Pole. Swift. Silent. Secure. Visit PowerPole.com to find a dealer near you.
BassEdge is rolling along as we are presented in part by Mercury Marine, returning with MLF BPT Pro Jacob Wheeler in the Lucas Oil Angler Spotlight. That's right, Lucas Oil High Performance Marine Products. Be sure and visit the BassEdge.com store for free shipping on all Lucas products. It works. Jacob, before we continue down the path that we were, I do want to take an opportunity. I want you to explain to BassEdge Nation, just tell us a little bit about your foundation and, some of the great things that you have going on kind of separate from your competitive fishing.
Yeah, something that's been important to me is giving back to the youth. I look at a lot of kids, I'm 30 years old now, and I look at where a lot of these kids are at now in high school and college fishing, and it just reminds me a lot of myself. They have a dream, they want to get to a position where they could potentially fish professionally for a living, and if that doesn't work out, work in the industry. And so I started the Wheeler Fishing Foundation just this year. We're kicking it off with a college event called the College Bass Shootout. This fall in Chickamauga, there's 100 teams, 200 anglers that will be competing this fall in September on Lake Chickamauga, and it's for $10,000. So it's a no entry fee deal.
Wow, that's awesome.
Took like 10 hours for the field to be set. It was full very quickly. But it was.
How did you announce it? Just like social media, or how did you get the word out there that you were going to have this event through your foundation?
So I started a Instagram profile for Wheeler Fishing Foundation that I have some, the team working on that as well. And then we sort of announced it there. I announced it on my page. I'm keeping people in the loop on my Wheeler Fishing accounts. And then my wife and I did a video on YouTube as well, sort of getting people and understanding, giving them heads up on what was going to come down the pipe. And that was it was crazy because we're still just trying to figure out. My wife has really been a huge help in all of this, which she always is, and just helping organize a lot of the things and trying to get everything dialed in. But that was sort of the start of it all. You announce this foundation, you figure out this tournament. And it's sort of a unique format. We're going to do 100 teams day one. Top 4 will advance on. The biggest bags in a 5-fish format will advance on. We'll weigh them in traditional format. And then it will go to 0, and it'll be a major league fishing format. And that time of year on Chickamauga, a lot of the fish are pretty skinny. It can be pretty tough, truthfully, to be honest with you. 10 pounds, it's hard. It's not always the easiest to catch. The traditional keeper is probably about 1.5 pounds, even a 15-incher. So I'm going to do 1.5 pounds minimum that final day, and it'll be, that the best team takes all. We'll actually film that. It'll be on the YouTube channel. It'll be the College Bass Shootout, and it'll actually be streamed the following week. So it's going to be a lot of fun, but it was just sort of an idea that we've had for several years now. COVID took it away a little bit last year, and then we were able to sort of jump back on, and I'm, super pumped to see how it all shakes out.
We'll have to continue to watch that. Again, it's the College Bass Shootout. I'm sure that, Jacob, you're going to continue having some great things going on with that foundation, and folks can check that out at www.wheelerfishingfoundation.org. So we will definitely stay tuned to some great programs and exciting things that you're doing there. All right, Jacob, during August, you're on a reservoir, because I'm trying to dig back into that fishing brain of yours. and I'm going to throw out a lake like Bugs Island, right? No, it's not a current-oriented lake. Bugs Island, solid, used to be a big tournament fishery there in Southern Virginia. It's one of those fisheries, there's not a lot of current, which we have anglers fishing a lot of lakes like this throughout the country. It's, you hear a lot about the TVA stuff and because there's so many events there. And of course, it's just a huge body of water. But there's a lot of folks in the country that are fishing reservoirs that don't have a lot of current. How are you going to locate bass quickly in this kind of seemingly August tough time of year? And what tactics will you use to quickly locate bass?
Yeah, August is a really tough time of year because more so than anything, that's the transition, the biggest transition that a lot of the bass do. I look at July as a transition a little bit, but a lot of times, sometimes there's still some pushing out, trying to get out there offshore. When it hits August, a lot of that year's shad spawn hatch is starting to get to where it's big enough where a substantial population of the bass in that body of water will actually start to feed on it. And they start to blow up on it. And they really start, that's when it gets really tough because they get so dialed in on that small bait, and that can be tough. It goes into September and everything else. But if I'm looking at Bugs Island, I probably would look, I've never actually been there before. So I'm sort of thinking of what I've seen from researched a little bit and looking at the lake maps and stuff like that, there's really 3 different things I'm going to look at. I'm probably going to be in that 8 to 12 foot stuff, looking for isolated pieces of cover, whether it's brush piles, stump rows, that in-between zone, because a lot of those fish that might be out there offshore will start to venture up there in that in-between stuff. And, the oxygen levels get a little bit lower. The fish start to push shallow. Definitely be one of the main deals that I will look at. Definitely looking at pockets and places that I would think the bluegill would be spawning in. That time of year can be a very good pattern for some really big fish. And then you start to look up the rivers and the back ends of the creeks. I mean, that's probably the 3 things that I'm going to look at if I'm going to Bugs Island in August. It's tough, but those are the things that I'm going to sort of, at least be rigging up for. I'm trying to prep and prepare secondary points, places, adjacent to where these fish are going to slide back up and start to move up there. It's more of a forage thing than anything. You have to think of what are they feeding on? Where is the bait at? What is their ultimate goal as a bass? That time of year is just to eat. So it's not like it's a spawn where he's trying to pre-spawn and get ready, or she's trying to pre-spawn and get ready to go up there and spawn later in the spring. There's not really that end goal there to where you're like, oh, well, they're going to eventually go to this pocket. It's not that easy all the time. That's why I think it's so hard. Their main goal is just to be feeding up and trying to get ready for the fall and the wintertime.
And kind of taking that a step further, Jacob, in August, would your approach differ, let's say, from like a lowland reservoir, as an example? Doesn't have to be this one, but let's say like Lake Seminole versus a highland reservoir, for example, like a Lake of the Ozarks.
Well, yeah, I think the biggest thing is cover. So you look at like Lake of the Ozarks, you have boat docks. That's the most prominent piece of cover out there on that body of water. But other than that, you have some brush piles. You have, you only have a handful of things there. Where at Seminole, you have grass. And you have so much grass, so that changes the dynamic a lot, so that scatters fish out. You have timber. So you have to definitely adjust according to the fishery. And I definitely, on a grass fishery, I might have to go, in August, that time of year, I'm probably going to flip a little bit of grass. I'm going to probably look for fish that are in that 8 to 12 foot zone, same probably zone, that mid-depth zone in my mind, but I'm probably going to be using a lot more time flipping grass. I might spend, very similar, spend some time up the rivers, looking for the where the oxygen levels are a little higher, fish are maybe having pressure because that group of fish hasn't been able to win any tournaments until it's gotten so tough. Those are the things that start to transpire. And it does change a little bit from highland reservoirs to lowland reservoirs, but it's more so about the cover that's really there and the structure and really what those fish have to really get around. And so like grass fishery will change a little bit, but a lot of it still stays fairly similar. I still will probably look for a bluegill spawn up shallow to try to understand if they were up there, fish are up there, feeding on those bluegill as well. So, I mean, it's close, but it does change a little bit.
Jacob, before we dive off into the listener question, one final thought that I would like to get from you, and that is, working, let's say, whether it's with your foundation or up-and-coming anglers or anglers that maybe are later in life that's just getting into the sport and wanting to get into competitive fishing. Obviously, you're a young guy, 30 years old, but you've been traveling the country for quite some time. What could you pass on, or what advice would you give to anglers that are trying to learn the fisheries like you've been fortunate to do, to be able to build a successful career in tournament bass fishing?
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest thing, and you hear this all the time, but I'm going to go deeper into this. There's no substitution for time on the water. That is true, but it's work ethic. It's understanding that, hey, listen, what happens is a lot of times you'll go out there and say you're fishing a Lake Champlain or Lake Chickamauga, and you go out there and you're going to pre-practice for this event or prepare for this event. It's so hard not to go back to the same areas and go check them out. Oh, man, you catch a couple bass, you get locked into the exact same thing from the last 10 years, of being on that body of water, or the last time you were there. You have to go with a clean slate, and you have to go into it with a mindset when you go to these bodies of water and be disciplined to know, hey, listen, I'm going to put my time in this zone and try to find a new deal on this body of water. I know I can go over here and catch them, and that's what I want to do, and that's what's fun because we all love catching bass. But you have to be disciplined to say, okay, listen, I'm not worried about catching bass now. I got to understand, hey, there might be a new area of this lake that I don't understand, and I need to really put my time in. There's people that I look at in this industry that just have that strong work ethic, and they're very successful because of it. And some of them are supernaturally talented, and they're insanely good anglers on both sides. And some of them had to learn how to catch them good, but they're just such hard workers that they get it. They could eventually get that skill set and understand it well enough to be super competitive or be very competitive in those events. So I think there's a combination of both that can be successful, but the common denominator is really, truly is work ethic and how much are you willing to work and what are you willing to sacrifice? You know, there's a lot of time away from home. There's a lot of time away from my family, and they sacrifice a lot while I'm out there on the road. But I understand that you have to be out there constantly searching, constantly thinking. And if you get complacent in this sport, you will fall behind.
Yeah, it's amazing to me, Jacob, the effort, not the effort that you put in. I mean, first of all, we like bass fishing because we like to fish. You know, that's why we all got started. We like to fish, we like to catch bass, but taking it to the level that I believe that you had some early foresight, you know, in the fact that, hey, I've got to learn these bodies of water better than anything that anybody else that I'm competing with knows. And you've been able to put yourself, you know, you can't say you know everybody, or I can't say that you know everybody of water better than, you know, some of the other 80 competitors in the BBT or whoever you're competing with. But I guarantee, because of the effort and time that you put into learning these things, not only behind the computer and at home and seasonal behavior patterns, but actually physically being out there and on these places and making that sacrifice to be away from home and having the will and desire to be at the top of the game, that's really kind of where you're at in your career and what set you apart. Do you feel like you're still out there as much as you were earlier in your career, or do you feel like you've kind of settled in now with the venues and how tournament fishing sets up as we know it?
See, that's such an interesting deal because, you know, I look at I think about this, and fisheries go through transition. They go through times where, you know, bass will get, you know, in certain areas the lake will be really hot for some years, and then they'll get really tough or whatever. That personally right now I'm still practicing pretty. I mean, if I know I didn't pre-practice for the St. Lawrence River, I didn't pre-practice for the, you know, Travis, actually the two that I actually, you know, won, but I still put my time in. If I've not gone to a fishery and I don't know a fishery or I've never been there, I have to go there and see the playing field. For me, it's an understanding. So I'll go to a fishery if I've not been there that's on the schedule just to see the playing field and understand, okay, the dynamic of that fishery. It allows for you to sit there in those 30 days that's prior to that event, weeks, months, and prior to that event, and really think about it and understand how it sets up. It's one thing looking at Google Earth and seeing, oh, well, there's grass here and that, but what kind of grass is that? What kind of, you know, what's the water clarity look like now? Oh, that grass isn't there anymore. And understanding a little bit of those dynamics, I think that's the biggest thing. Is there's so many variables in bass fishing that you need to try to control as many as you can. And so, like, I don't go out and pre-practice as much as I used to because I do have a little bit better understanding. But, you know, when I have the opportunity to, like after I won the first round up there at St. Lawrence River, I drove straight over to Champlain and spent a day and a half over there practicing for the next event or next BPT. Is up there on Champlain, you know? So utilizing your time wisely is just, you know, that's the biggest thing. I could have sat there in the hotel room and twiddled my thumbs and, you know, whatever, but those are the things that you have to do no matter how well you know it. I also see people that I look back on that have had a lot of knowledge of a fishery and have gotten really good at a fishery, but then they lean on just a handful of places too much. And what happens is those places aren't nearly as good as they used to be, and the fishery has changed, dynamics have changed, and then they fall behind, and then they all of a sudden start missing checks and missing cuts because they're just so dependent on what they knew from years past. And that's changed now. So I've seen that happen several times. So there's a little bit of combination of both.
That's funny. We actually just talked about that in a recent episode about changing the, you know, environments and how fisheries go through an ecosystem change and how if you're there on a weekly basis, you don't really notice the change. But if it's 6 months, 8 months, 2 years, then those changes become more profound and you've got to be able to adjust to those, just like you're talking about, or you're going to get stuck in that rut someplace where you used to be, really well off and cash consistently. Potentially you become behind the scenes or behind the game.
Yeah,
behind the process of the
changing
of the fishery.
100%. Look at that event. Okay, here's a good one for you. Look at Lake Oneida. We fished that several times in events, in the last 5 to 7 years.
Yes.
That place was a schooling fish place. They were running around all over the place. Now those fish are built differently. Now they have gobies in there, and they relate differently to what they have.
Absolutely.
So you can't necessarily go back to the same deal and expect to catch them because they're not dependent on those shad or those bait fish as much as they once were. Now their diet really consists of gobies.
100% agree. That's so funny. I just did a youth fishing camp over there, and we were talking about the same thing while we were there, because you just don't catch them on poppers and walkers like you used to back in the day. They were more perch runners, and now they're just really concentrating on bottom-oriented feed, crawfish, gobies, and they just seem to always kind of have their head down rather than their head looking up. I mean, sure, you're going to get a topwater bite here and there, but it's not. Yeah. It's not the same place, or it doesn't fish the same as it used to. So great example. And Jacob, we're going to move right into the listener question, man. This has been an awesome interview, and appreciate you helping us kind of dissect your success so that we can better understand what potentially could make us successful on the water. This segment brought to us by Nitro Performance Bass Boat. This question sent in from an angler in South Carolina. Kind of an interesting question, a little more oriented to early summer, I think, than where we're at now in late summer. But they ask this: what time of day should you stop fishing bushes and tree lines and start fishing offshore timber, ledges, and laydowns?
That's an interesting question, because I've also realized it might be the opposite way, and that's so interesting to me, because I've seen several times where that shallow water cover is not as good until the sun gets up. Really, my favorite time of day to actually fish shallow laydowns and shade lines and stuff like that is between 9 and 11 o'clock, 9 and 12 o'clock. Typically, I will start offshore in the morning. Now, if I don't have a really good understanding of the offshore bite, because a lot of times those fish that are out there offshore, they're actually there in the morning. It could be a very good morning feed, and you can catch those fish. But there's always a lull between like a 9 o'clock to midday, 9 to 12. It's always one of the toughest times of fishing that I think we go through really across the country. And that is when I start to fish for those isolated fish that are up there on the bank, because I know and I realize, hey, listen, this is going to be a tougher time of the day. But then it's also that sun starts to position those fish a little bit more. They don't have, especially since they're isolated and we're talking about summertime, I want to confine those fish to a little bit smaller, those shade pockets, those trees. So that sun getting up allows me to do, make those casts and really be able to cover efficiently, a bank a little bit more efficiently than I would be maybe if that sun was down. And then the last, towards the end of the day, then I'll go back out offshore, because a lot of times that last two, from 1 to 3 o'clock, that's, in my opinion, probably the best time to be out offshore. So that's how I would sort of attack it, just from being from the outside looking in. I mean, that's probably depending on the body of water, but that's definitely, I've seen several tournaments that I fished events just like that.
Great answer there, Jacob, and appreciate you taking on that question and kind of flip-flop. Very, very interesting perspective there. And honestly, Kurt, kind of a weird deal. We have this anonymous mystery listener question from somebody in South Carolina. So listen, if you are that person, that South Carolina listener that shot us that question, we need one more thing from you, and that is please email us at support@bassedge.com, or simply click on the Claim Your Prize tab on bassedge.com. Give us your information, and we will get the Bass Edge gift sent out directly to you, and let us know that Jacob answered your question here on episode 357.
And next time anybody sends in a question, always send in their name with the question. That'd be great help. But we get so many questions, Aaron, that I just thought that one was a great one for Jacob, especially because he lives on a TVA impoundment, and that summertime flip-flop can be a tough deal. So keep sending in these great questions either through our website, click the Ask the Pros tab, or comment on our Facebook or Instagram media pages, and we'll be happy to get these on the show.
And Jacob, hey, thanks again for carving out time. I know you're extremely busy and certainly don't want to cut into your future episodes of Baby Shark with Olivia. So before we let you go, though, just want to see if you have any final thoughts for Bass Edge Nation.
Man, I just appreciate you guys having me on. It's always great talking to you both. You guys are a wealth of knowledge, Kurt. We've known each other for a long time, man. I've same. And it's just, man, it's always great just sort of catching up with the boys. You know, it's been a lot of fun. It's been a fun ride, and it's always good just to sort of catch up with you guys and check back in, man.
Well, Jacob, it's going to be great following you over there at Champlain. Awesome to hear you put in that extra work over there. And then, of course, the BBT wraps up in September at St. Clair. Man, you are sitting right on the edge of another Angler of the Year title. Best of luck to you in those remaining events, man. We'll be pulling for you, no doubt.
I really appreciate you guys. Thanks a lot.
BassEdge Radio will be back with some final thoughts from Aaron and I. Don't go away.
You know the importance of protecting your investments, so why use anything else other than the original and toughest DIY keel protector for your boat? Megaware KeelGuard. Grinding sand, abrasive rocks, and concrete ramps are no match for our exclusive contoured edge and patented technology. Megaware KeelGuard keel protectors are made tough and made to stick. Their do-it-yourself installation takes less than an hour, providing the longest-lasting, most dependable keel protection for your boat, guaranteed for life. Developed specifically by boat builders offering the best keel protection in the industry. Also from Megaware KeelGuard, Skeg Guard, Flex Step Pro, and Pontoon Guard. So give your boat the performance edge. Put on the protection the pros pick. Megaware KeelGuard.
The PowerPole Charge Marine Power Management Station is the most advanced system of its kind available on the market. It does the work of 3 devices, a traditional battery charger, a charge on the run, and an emergency start system, all in one compact unit. The Charge lets you run your boat's accessories the way you want to run them by allowing you to monitor and control your power usage through the PowerPole app. It automatically devotes power to the batteries that need it the most for maximum efficiency. The new Charge from PowerPole. Power where you need it, power how you need it, power when you need it.
Be at home with nature with nature-inspired art, decor, and gifts by Wild Wings at wildwings.com. Explore art prints and canvas wraps of bass, trout, walleye, muskie, and more by acclaimed artists like Mark Cicino.
I primarily paint underwater scenes of game fish, and usually in a fishing situation, going after prey or going after a lure or a fly. I get asked sometimes whether I like fishing better or artwork. It would be tough to give either of them up. I can't really think of a good reason to give either up, so I'm going to stick with them.
Make your home, office, or cabin show off your passion for angling. Visit wildwings.com/BassEdge and sign up for an exclusive offer to BassEdge listeners of 10% off your next order. Give something special to your loved one and be at home with nature. Visit wildwings.com/BassEdge. That's wildwings.com/BassEdge to get 10% off your next order of nature-inspired art, decor, and gifts by Wild Wings.
Kurt, interview stands on its own. Information stands on its own. I just made a note, jotted down, can't put a finger on it. A quote from Jacob, preparation stands out. I just want to point out, even things such as preparing for this interview, he reached out to you, had a question. So, that is constant across all things Jacob Wheeler, not just his fishing.
Yeah, dude's on point, man. He's running a business, and that transcends from the interviews and all he does with the media to his fishing. And it originally came from his fishing and now into the media. So it's full circle for this guy, man. He completes the frickin' circle. And that's what makes him special. That's what makes him the number one bass angler in the world. That's what makes him better than the rest in a typical event in most cases. He does some really cool stuff. As far as his foundation now he started as well. So, he's bringing the whole package, man. And it's hard for him to put his finger on it. But if we keep asking questions and we listen to the interview back several times, we find out what's making him a little bit better than the rest. And that's the key to this interview. That's the key to BassEdge Radio. That's the key to bringing the education to the audience to make us all, myself included, better anglers, and how to get to the potential top of this game or whatever game it is that you're playing, whether it's your local club level, if it's, weekend out on the water, just trying to catch as many fish as you can. This is the process. You dive into it. You look at some of the details that can help you be more successful.
Yeah, and referencing your quote, whole package, total package, full circle, we got all of that and then some from Jacob, and it's always a pleasure to have him. Always a pleasure to be on the mic with you, and certainly both of us are very thankful that all of you there in BassEdge Nation continue to tune us in and take this journey with us. In the meantime, we look forward to spending time again with everybody here in a couple weeks, August 15th, to where we will have more All Things BassEdge with hopefully another special guest coming up. Be sure to stay on All Things BassEdge through our social media and certainly BassEdge.com. For Kurt Dove and the rest of the BassEdge crew, I am Aaron Martin. So long, everybody.
The Edge is presented by Megaware KeelGuard. For more information on BassEdge or to shop at the BassEdge online store, visit BassEdge.com. And be sure to join Kurt Dove and Aaron Martin right here on another episode of The Edge. Brought to you in part by Nitro Boats, Lucas Oil, ProtectTheHarvest.com, Mercury Marine, PowerPole,